Hey, Awesomes. Instructor Corey here, back with you to talk to you about how to write and format the IMRaD, IMRAD introduction section. All right. So recall from our previous videos, we have written our title page, right? We've got our settings up here. We are on a decent font here that's legible. We're at 12 point. All right. And most importantly as well, we double space. We've removed spaces before and after paragraphs. We have set up our title page. We have our abstract in place, at least at this time. Even though we're going to write it last, we've got the page for it. So now we are ready for the introduction section. So one of the things I do want to highlight and point out for you right here, we're looking a lot right here into this right here. All right, so let me see. I'm going to do this on the fly highlight color here. All right. So largely an APA format. We call it, sometimes it's referred to as IMRaD, and that's a capital I, capital M, capital R, lowercase a, and a capital D for discussion. So you've got introduction, methods, results, analysis, and discussion. Okay. Those are like the main sections of the APA research paper. By and large, a lot of research papers also in other disciplines, perhaps MLA, right, Chicago style. Well, there might be some different formatting and how those come across or how they appear. What goes where you center a title or put a title or don't put a title or a heading or a subheading and these kinds of things. While those things may differ, by and large in the sciences, social sciences as well, such as APA, American Psychological Association, very, very, very keen on this format and following this format fairly consistently. Okay. The only other thing that falls outside of that perhaps would be a very specific APA written literature review that might be a standalone literature review for publication. Those happen occasionally, which is also kind of a subsection, if you will, in the introduction. And we'll get to that here in a second. All right, so let's begin. This is where your introduction begins, right? Notice it is indented in contrast to the abstract, not indented, okay? Secondly, you do not have a heading or a subheading that states introduction. Okay. You have your title bolded, same title from your title page, right? Title of your paper in bold, 12 point, font of your choice, centered, your title. Then you come back to you go down to the next line, left justify, hit one tab, right? You got to indent a half inch. This is where your introduction begins. Notice that this paragraph is indented 1/2 inch from the left margin. And we just discussed the IMRaD format. And so what this section here that I've written for you is going to do is kind of give you a step-by-step guide of how to write the introduction. Again, okay, this section of the introduction very well be one of the last things that you write. So I'm kind of weird. I like to write my introductions ahead of time. I like to have my introduction, my literature review, my methods, and I write them in order. Makes sense to me. I've had several students that will write the methods section, then the results section, the discussion section, put their references in, then go back and write the introduction section, and then finally write the abstract. I generally do mine introduction, methods, results, analysis, discussion. Obviously, my references are there, and then I'll write my abstract. Come back in and write my abstract last. I always have a spot for it, my abstract, the page. So by and large, regularly, fairly consistently, my introduction section begins on page 3. So here we are, page 3. We've bold centered our title. We've indented. Now we're going to start doing these 5 things. All right. The content for the introduction section is fairly straightforward. The objectives, all right, or the objective, all right, through these 5 things are these. Introduce the topic in a few sentences, especially as it relates to your specific approach to the topic you are introducing. In other words, we don't need to go back to the beginning of time. This is one thing I always tell students or anybody that I'm having a conversation with about an introduction section. There's no need to go back to where it all began, right? Figure out this. We've talked about this a lot this semester, entering the conversation. Find out where are you entering the conversation. That's kind of going to be where you're going to introduce your topic. Where is that? Almost like you're kind of starting within that gap. And so what do you need to say to get us right into where that gap is, or where perhaps you think nobody else is looking at this topic the way that you're looking at it, or you see this particular problem. Where is it right in there in that problem that you can get us into the conversation right here? Okay, so that's the first thing that you want to do in a sentence or two. Secondly, provide a little bit of background concretely, right there again, fairly quickly, describes the setting. All right, so sometimes students will do this through a perhaps an example, or through some sort of a quote in some cases. According to researchers, this thing is happening, right? Sometimes you can use that as well. The next thing you want to do is reveal now your specific research argument, right? Or your analysis question. This is where this is what I was trying, this is what I'm really looking at. This is where the heart of what I'm looking at is, right? And again, this key right here is that you want to be precise, okay? You want to be precise and concise. All right, so not necessarily looking for a historical treatment of this. We want to save that a little bit more for the literature review that's next. But we want to boldly state what it is that we're researching. What's the problem in a sentence or two, followed by a sentence that explains why is it important. This is not necessarily as concise necessarily as our abstract, but we don't want to go off on too many tangents. We just really want to stay focused on the problem, the issue, why it's important. Not necessarily too much extraneous information, but we really kind of want to try to stay as focused as possible. Then once we say that, we also want to say why it's important. Okay, this why is going to give us a nice segue in to talk about the objectives. Okay, so if this is important, here are these objectives that we're looking at. Here's the kind of the purpose of my paper, and a little bit in it, we can add some more substance, right? To number 4 here allows us to add substance to the why that we just stated. So if we say X is important because, right, and we state what that because is, now we want to give a little bit more meat to it. Now we can go on and say something along the lines of, it maybe has other ramifications, right? It can potentially also benefit in these other areas. It also has the potential to do X, not only X, but Y and Z. It can help us do X, Y, and Z. It might help something, looking at this in this particular way, or solving this problem also can help us think about things in this way, or also solve these other problems. Maybe there's a domino effect. And finally, the very last thing, right? Especially if you're writing an argumentative APA research paper, you'll end with your thesis statement. If you're writing more of an analytical APA research paper, this is where you can then take your research question. It's kind of more along the analysis aspect, and you kind of rephrase it more into a declarative statement, okay, that now talks about maybe anticipated results, right? Carries on forth a little bit, right? Because basically the last sentence or two here, I got to follow from, okay, here is the topic. Here's what I'm talking about. Here's a little bit of background about it. Here's the problem. Here's why it's important, right? Here now is the objectives of kind of really not just solving what solving this problem it looks like, or what analyzing this further can potentially beneficially be or do. Now we're looking at, okay, now we've got, boom, here's what we're doing. These anticipated results, because based on this, these issues, these problems, etc., from an analysis standpoint, can then have, as I go through this methodically and these results and discussion, could have these other benefits. further us in some way, right? Maybe it's even a nod to the future as well as to those anticipated results. All right, so you got a lot going on there, depending whether it's argumentative or whether it's analytical. If you obviously, if you're doing argumentative or even if you're doing analytical, there's going to be hints of both perhaps in there. But if you feel that you're by and large, you have a very strong thesis statement that you're going to state at the end here versus ending with more talking about the research question and its future in some way, then kind of gives you an idea that you have more of an analytical APA research paper, if that makes sense. Okay. So now that you've done that, right, generally an introduction is maybe one or two, at least 2 paragraphs. Some say 1 to 2 paragraphs, right? We don't want it to be super long. We want to kind of say, okay, boom, boom, boom. Here's the topic. Here's some of the background. Here's what I'm researching. Here's why. And here's where I'm headed. Okay. Then as soon as we're done with that, we're going to go center, bold. We're going to say literature review. Now, the annotated bibliography, the sources map that we did, all comes into play right here. All right. And we'll talk more about that in the next video. All right, guys, I hope you found this helpful. How to write and format your APA introduction section to the APA IMRaD concept, if you will.